I found the smoking gun at 3 in the morning while trying to figure out why my HOA dues had jumped $200 in 6 months. The spreadsheet on my laptop screen blurred as I rubbed my eyes, but the numbers didn't change. Unit 2847, Maplewood Condominiums, Phoenix, Arizona. Monthly HOA payment, $850. Except I'd never heard of Unit 2847, and our complex in Scottsdale only went up to $2,600. I lived in a modest 3-bedroom townhouse in the Copper Ridge HOA, about 20 miles northeast of downtown Phoenix, and I'd been a homeowner here for 5 years. The development had 230 units total, all neatly organized in clusters around artificial ponds and desert landscaping that required constant maintenance, which supposedly justified our ever-increasing fees. My name is Derek Mitchell, and I'm a forensic accountant by trade. I spend my days untangling financial messes for law firms and corporate clients, so when I noticed the discrepancies in our HOA financial statements, I couldn't just let it go. It was like seeing a typo in a published book. Once you spot it, you can't stop thinking about it. The whole thing started innocently enough. I'd been reviewing the quarterly financial report that our HOA president, Patricia Cunningham, had emailed to all residents. Most people probably deleted it without opening the attachment, but I actually read these things. The operational expenses seemed high, particularly the property maintenance and improvement line item, which had ballooned from $43,000 to nearly $90,000 in just 1 year. I'd requested the detailed ledgers through the proper channels, citing Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33 to 1806, which gives homeowners the right to inspect HOA financial records. Patricia had pushed back initially, claiming the records were being organized, but after I sent a certified letter with legal language about compliance requirements, the documents arrived in my email inbox. All 642 pages of poorly scanned, barely legible financial statements. That's when the real work began. I'd spent the last 2 weeks transferring the data into a clean spreadsheet, organizing transactions by category, date, and vendor. The process was tedious, but my training had taught me that financial fraud almost always leaves traces. You just have to know where to look. The phantom unit was the first red flag, but as I dug deeper, I found more. Wire transfers labeled as emergency roof repairs for buildings that had received new roofs just 3 years ago. Monthly payments to a landscaping company that didn't appear in any of our community's vendor contracts. A series of checks written to something called Residential Services LLC, totaling over $60,000 in the past year alone. I took a screenshot of Unit 2847 payment history and sent it to my email before continuing my search. The timestamps on the transactions were interesting. Most were processed late at night or on weekends, when fewer people would be monitoring the accounts. Professional embezzlers knew that timing mattered. By 4:30 in the morning, I'd compiled a preliminary list of suspicious transactions totaling nearly $215,000 over an 18-month period. My coffee had gone cold, but my anger was burning hot. This wasn't just financial mismanagement. This was systematic theft from every homeowner in Copper Ridge. I needed more information before I could take this to the authorities. Financial irregularities could sometimes be explained by poor bookkeeping or legitimate expenses that were poorly documented. I needed proof of intent, proof that someone was deliberately stealing from the HOA. The sun was coming up when I finally closed my laptop and tried to get a few hours of sleep. My wife, Jennifer, had already left for her nursing shift at Banner Desert Medical Center, leaving a note on the kitchen counter reminding me about the HOA meeting scheduled for that evening. Perfect timing, I thought. Maybe I'd get a chance to observe Patricia Cunningham up close and see how she reacted to questions about the finances. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a Spanish-style building near the main entrance that also housed a small gym and a pool table nobody ever used. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat in the back row, my folder of printed documents resting on my lap. About 30 other residents trickled in, which was a decent turnout for a monthly meeting. Most were retirees who had nothing better to do on a Tuesday evening, plus a few younger homeowners like myself who actually cared about what was happening with our investment. Patricia Cunningham swept in precisely at 7 o'clock, followed by her entourage of board members. Treasurer Ronald Yamamoto, Secretary Linda Peterson, and at-large members Gary Chen and Susan Bradford. Patricia was exactly what you'd picture when someone said HOA president. A woman in her mid-50s with an aggressive blonde bob, too much makeup, and the kind of forced smile that never reached her eyes. She wore a coral blazer over a white blouse and carried a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia said, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that certain middle-aged women perfect over years of practice. "Let's call this meeting to order. First item on our agenda is the approval of last month's minutes." I sat through 20 minutes of mind-numbing discussions about pool hours, guest parking policies, and a complaint about someone's wind chimes before the meeting moved to financial matters. Ronald Yamamoto, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who always seemed uncomfortable with public speaking, cleared his throat and opened his own folder. "Our current operating account balance is $134,000, he read in a monotone voice. "Reserve fund stands at $210,000. Monthly income from dues is $98,000, and expenses for last month totaled $86,000. Any questions about the financial report?" Patricia asked, already moving to close the topic. I raised my hand. "Yes, I have several questions." Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Derek, right, what's your question?" "I've been reviewing the detailed financial statements from the past year, and I noticed some irregularities. Can you explain why we're making payments to a unit 2847 when our complex only has units numbered up to 2600? The room got very quiet. Ronald Yamamoto's face went pale, and he fumbled with his papers. Patricia's expression didn't change, but I noticed her fingers grip the edge of the podium. "Unit 2847 is a typo in the system," Patricia said smoothly. "It refers to Building 28, Unit 47, simple clerical error." "We don't have a Building 28, I countered. "We have 22 buildings, numbered 1 through 22. And none of our units end in 47, they are all numbered sequentially within each building." A few people around me started whispering. Patricia's smile was gone now, replaced by a thin line of irritation. "I don't appreciate your tone, Derek. If you have concerns about our financial management, you can submit them in writing and we'll review them at the next meeting." "I'd rather discuss them now, since I've already done the research," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "I've identified over $200,000 in questionable transactions over the past 18 months. That's more than 2% of our total operating budget being spent on expenses that don't appear to benefit our community." The whispers turned into actual conversations. An older woman in the front row turned around to look at me with wide eyes. Gary Chen leaned over to whisper something to Susan Bradford. Patricia slammed her hand on the podium. "This is not the appropriate venue for unfounded accusations. This meeting is adjourned." "You can't just adjourn the meeting because you don't like the questions," I said, standing up. "Arizona law requires HOAs to maintain transparent financial records and answer homeowner inquiries. I'm asking for an independent audit of our finances." "I second that motion," said a voice from the middle of the room. I recognized the speaker as Tom Rodriguez, a retired firefighter who lived 3 doors down from me. "I've been wondering why my dues keep going up when nothing seems to be improving around here." More voices joined in, and suddenly, Patricia had lost control of the room. People were demanding answers, asking their own questions and pulling out their phones to document what was happening. Patricia's face had turned an interesting shade of red, and she grabbed her portfolio and whispered something urgent to Ronald Yamamoto. "Fine," Patricia practically spat the word. "If you want an audit, you'll need to follow proper procedures. Submit a written request signed by at least 20% of homeowners, and the board will consider it. This meeting is now officially adjourned." She stormed out of the clubhouse with the other board members trailing behind her like confused ducklings. I found myself surrounded by concerned neighbors wanting to know more about what I'd found. I spent the next hour explaining the irregularities while Tom Rodriguez started a petition on his tablet for the independent audit. By the time I got home at 9:30, Jennifer was already in her pajamas watching a true crime documentary. "How was the HOA meeting?" she asked without looking away from the screen. "I think I just started a war," I said, dropping my folder on the coffee table. She paused the show and turned to look at me. "What did you do?" I told her everything: the phantom unit, the suspicious transactions, Patricia's defensive reaction. Jennifer listened with growing concern, and when I finished, she shook her head slowly. "Derek, you know I support you, but are you sure you want to take this on? HOA boards can make your life miserable. They can fine you for every little thing, make you tear out landscaping, all sorts of petty revenge. She's stealing from us," I said. "From every person in this community." "I can't just ignore that." "I know you can't," Jennifer sighed. "That's why I married you. Just promise me you'll be careful. If there's really $200,000 missing, whoever took it isn't going to give up without a fight." She was more right than either of us knew. The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. According to the citation, my garbage cans were visible from the street in violation of community standards, and I was being fined $150. I looked at my garbage cans, which were in the exact same spot they'd been for 5 years, tucked beside my garage where they were barely visible unless you were actively looking for them. The citation was signed by Patricia Cunningham. "Here we go," I muttered, taking a photo of the notice and the placement for my records. Over the next few days, I received 3 more violations. One for my front yard landscaping allegedly containing non-approved desert plants, even though I'd used the exact species recommended in the HOA guidelines. Another for parking my car on the street overnight when there was no such rule in our CC and Articus. And a final one claiming my exterior paint color had faded beyond acceptable standards and needed to be repainted within 30 days at my own expense. Each violation came with fines ranging from $100 to $300. It was obvious retaliation, and it was also a tactical error on Patricia's part. Every petty violation she issued just made me more determined to expose what she was doing. The petition for an independent audit gained signatures quickly. Tom Rodriguez went door to door with his tablet, explaining the situation to neighbors who hadn't attended the meeting. Within a week, we had signatures from 73 homeowners, nearly 32% of the community, well above the 20% threshold required. I compiled the petition along with a formal request letter citing the relevant Arizona statutes and submitted it to the board through certified mail. The board had 30 days to respond and schedule a special meeting to vote on the audit. While waiting for their response, I continued digging into the financial records. I'd hit a wall with the information I had access to, so I started investigating from a different angle. I searched for Residential Services LLC in the Arizona Corporation Commission database and found it had been registered 18 months ago. The registered agent was listed as Marcus Chen, but the business address was a UPS store in Mesa. That was another red flag. Legitimate businesses didn't usually use mailbox services as their official address. I paid the small fee to access the company's annual report and found that Marcus Chen was listed as the sole member. A quick Google search revealed that Marcus Chen was a relatively common name, but when I cross-referenced it with Patricia Cunningham's social media profiles, I found something interesting. Patricia had posted a photo from someone's birthday party about 8 months ago. In the background, partially cropped out, was a man who looked to be in his early 30s. Patricia had tagged several people in the photo, but not him. However, one of the tagged people, a woman named Rebecca Steinberg, had commented, "Tell Marcus happy birthday from us." I went down the rabbit hole of Rebecca's social media and found more photos. Marcus Chen appeared in several of them, always at events where Patricia was also present. In one photo from a Sedona winery tour, Marcus had his arm around Patricia's waist. The caption read, "Best weekend with the best people." I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. Patricia Cunningham was married. I'd seen her husband Richard at a few community events. He was a quiet man who worked in pharmaceutical sales and seemed content to let Patricia run their social life. But the body language in these photos suggested that Marcus Chen was more than just a friend. I searched for Marcus Chen's personal social media profiles and found an Instagram account that was mostly private. But his public photos showed a lifestyle that didn't match someone running a modest property services company. Recent posts showed him at expensive restaurants, driving a Tesla Model S and vacationing in Cabo San Lucas. His bio listed him as an entrepreneur and included a link to a luxury real estate page. Curious, I clicked through to the real estate listing. It was for a high-rise condo in downtown Phoenix, specifically in the Cityscape complex. The unit was listed as sold 6 months ago for $750,000. The listing agent was identified, and on a hunch, I called the number. Pinnacle Realty, this is Deanne speaking. Hi Deanne, my name is Derek Mitchell. I'm calling about a property that was recently sold in Cityscape. I'm trying to reach the owner, Marcus Chen, regarding a business matter. I'm sorry, sir, I can't give out owner information, Deanne said professionally. I understand. I'm actually trying to verify some business records. Can you at least confirm if the property address is 2847 North Central Avenue? There was a pause. Yes, that's one of the Cityscape addresses. Is there something else I can help you with? My heart was pounding. No, that's all I needed. Thank you. Unit 2847. Not a building and unit number in our complex, an actual address in downtown Phoenix. I pulled up the Maricopa County Assessor's website and searched for the property. The record showed it had been purchased 6 months ago for $750,000, with the owner listed as Residential Services LLC. I started calculating dates in my spreadsheet. The monthly payments from our HOA to Residential Services LLC had started 18 months ago at $5,000 per month. After 6 months, they'd increased to $8,000 per month. The timing aligned perfectly. The company collected money from our HOA for 6 months, then purchased a $750,000 condo and continued receiving increased payments thereafter. The condo's property tax records showed it was classified as residential property, not a business address. Someone was living there, and I had a pretty good idea who. I needed to confirm my suspicions before taking this information to the authorities. I drove down to Cityscape the next morning, a Thursday when I knew Patricia would be busy with her Pilates class. I'd overheard her mentioning it at a previous HOA meeting. The Cityscape complex was one of Phoenix's premier downtown addresses, with luxury condos, upscale restaurants, and panoramic city views. The building's lobby was all glass and steel, with a security desk and a concierge. I couldn't just walk up to Unit 2847, but I could watch the entrance from a coffee shop across the street. I settled in with a latte and a newspaper, feeling slightly ridiculous, like a character in a bad detective movie. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:15, Marcus Chen emerged from the building wearing designer jeans and a fitted black t-shirt, looking every bit like someone who didn't have a regular 9-to-5 job. He climbed into the Tesla I'd seen in his photos and drove off. I was about to leave when another figure caught my attention. Patricia Cunningham, dressed in expensive athletic wear with her yoga mat bag, walked up to the building entrance. The doorman greeted her by name and held the door open. She went inside like she owned the place. Which, technically, she kind of did, or at least the HOA's money did. I took photos with my phone, documenting the time and date. I waited another 2 hours, but Patricia didn't emerge. I had to get back home for a client call, but I'd seen enough to confirm my theory. That evening, I organized all my evidence into a comprehensive report. I had the financial records showing the payments to Residential Services LLC, the corporate records showing Marcus Chen as the registered agent, the property records showing the company owned the condo, social media evidence suggesting a relationship between Patricia and Marcus, and my own photographic evidence placing Patricia at the property. The HOA board's response to our audit petition arrived the next day via email. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic stonewalling. The board acknowledged receiving our petition, but claimed that an independent audit was financially irresponsible and would cost the community tens of thousands of dollars. Instead, they proposed that Ronald Yamamoto, as treasurer, conduct an internal review and report his findings at the next quarterly meeting. It was exactly what I'd expected, an attempt to control the narrative and bury the evidence. I forwarded the email to Tom Rodriguez and the other homeowners who'd signed the petition, along with a message suggesting we needed to take more aggressive action. Tom called me within an hour. "This is garbage. They're just trying to run out the clock and hope we give up." "I know," I said. "But I've found more evidence. I think Patricia is having an affair with this Marcus Chen guy and she's been funneling HOA money to pay for his condo. We need to go to the police." "Are you sure? That's a serious accusation." "I've documented everything. The financial records, the corporate filings, the property ownership. I saw Patricia entering the building myself. This isn't just financial mismanagement, this is criminal fraud and embezzlement." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Okay, what do you need from me?" "I need witnesses. Other people who have noticed things, who can corroborate that something fishy has been going on. And I need someone to come with me when I file the report. This can't just be me making accusations. We need to show this is a community concern." "I'm in," Tom said immediately. "And I know at least 5 other people who will back us up. When do you want to go?" "Tomorrow morning. Scottsdale Police Department, 9 a.m. That night, I barely slept. I kept reviewing my evidence, making sure I hadn't missed anything or jumped to conclusions. Jennifer was supportive but worried. "What if you're wrong?" she asked as we lay in bed. "What if there's an explanation for all of this?" "Then I'll apologize and look like an idiot," I said. "But I'm not wrong. The numbers don't lie and the pattern is too clear. Patricia has been stealing from us to support her boyfriend's lifestyle." "Her alleged boyfriend," Jennifer corrected. "You don't actually know they're together." "Fair enough. But whether they're together or not, the money is definitely going to that condo, and that condo is definitely owned by his company, and he's definitely connected to her. That's fraud no matter what their relationship status is." The next morning, Tom Rodriguez and I met in the parking lot of the Scottsdale Police Department on Civic Center Plaza. He'd brought his neighbor Carol Williams, a retired school principal with a sharp eye for detail who'd been documenting her own concerns about HOA finances. Together, we walked into the station and asked to speak with someone about financial fraud. We were directed to Detective Sarah Mackenzie, a woman in her early 40s with short auburn hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen it all. She invited us into a small conference room and listened as I walked through the evidence, handing her copies of the documents I'd prepared. Detective Mackenzie took notes and asked clarifying questions. She was particularly interested in the connection between Residential Services LLC and the cityscape property. When I showed her the photos of Patricia entering the building, she nodded slowly. "This is detailed work," she said. "How long have you been investigating this?" About 3 weeks since I found the first irregularities, but I've been noticing problems with the finances for about 6 months. And you're a forensic accountant by profession? Yes, ma'am. I work primarily with law firms on financial litigation cases. She smiled slightly. Well, that explains the thoroughness. Okay, here's what's going to happen. Based on what you've shown me, there's enough here to open an investigation. I'll need to get warrants for the bank records and corporate documents, which will take a few days. In the meantime, I need you to not discuss this investigation with anyone outside of the people in this room. If Patricia Cunningham gets wind that we're looking into her, she might try to destroy evidence or move money around. What about the other homeowners? Tom asked. A lot of people are waiting to hear what happens with the audit request. Tell them the process is ongoing, but don't mention police involvement yet. We need to move carefully on this. Financial fraud cases can be complex, and we need to build an airtight case before we make any moves. We agreed to her terms and left the police station feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. I'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped now, and while I was confident in my evidence, there was still a chance I'd missed something or misinterpreted the data. The next 2 weeks were agonizing. I had to act normal at HOA events, smile and nod at Patricia when I saw her at the mailboxes, and pretend I wasn't waiting for the police to raid her house. She was still issuing petty violations to my property. I was up to 11 citations now, totaling over $2,000 in fines that I was refusing to pay on principal. Detective Mackenzie called me on a Tuesday afternoon. We've executed the warrants and collected the financial records. I need you to come down to the station and help us interpret some of these documents. I took a half-day off work and spent 4 hours with Detective Mackenzie and a prosecutor from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, a sharp woman named Victoria Patel who specialized in white-collar crime. They'd obtained bank records for both the HOA accounts and Residential Services, LLC, and the evidence was even more damning than I'd initially thought. Patricia had been writing checks from the HOA account to Residential Services, LLC for various fabricated services. Landscaping, maintenance, consulting fees, emergency repairs. The money would land in Residential Services, LLC's account, and then within days, it would be transferred to either the mortgage payment for the Cityscape condo or directly to Marcus Chen's personal accounts. But there was more. The investigators had found that Patricia had also been inflating actual vendor invoices. A legitimate plumbing repair that cost $2,000 would be entered into the HOA books as $4,000, with the extra $2,000 being kicked back to her through various shell companies. She'd been skimming from multiple sources simultaneously. The total theft appears to be somewhere around $380,000 over a 2-year period, Victoria Patel said, sliding a summary sheet across the table. That's significantly more than your initial estimate. I felt sick. $380,000 stolen from my neighbors, from retirees on fixed incomes, from young families trying to build equity in their homes. What happens now? I asked. Now we arrest Patricia Cunningham and Marcus Chen on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. We'll also be going after the other board members, though preliminary evidence suggests they might have been negligent rather than actively complicit. Ronald Yamamoto's signatures are on a lot of checks, but we're still determining whether he knew what was happening or if Patricia forged his approval. When will the arrests happen? Tomorrow morning. We'll have officers at Patricia's residence and at the Cityscape condo simultaneously. I wanted to give you a heads up since you'll probably get calls from neighbors once word gets out. The arrests happened at 6:30 in the morning. I know because I was awake, drinking coffee and staring at my phone when Tom Rodriguez texted me. Police cars at Patricia's house. 4 of them. What's happening? I called him and explained everything. Within minutes, my phone was blowing up with calls and texts from other homeowners. The neighborhood's social media groups were exploding with speculation and photos of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, still in her bathrobe, her face a mask of shock and fury. The news stations picked up the story by lunchtime. HOA president arrested for embezzling nearly $400K to fund boyfriend's luxury condo was the headline on the local ABC affiliate. Patricia's mugshot was everywhere, along with photos of the cityscape building and details about the investigation. My phone rang constantly for 3 days. Reporters wanted interviews, neighbors wanted details, and several people wanted to know if we'd ever get the money back. That last question was the hardest to answer because I honestly didn't know. The HOA held an emergency meeting the following week. The remaining board members had all resigned, and a crisis management attorney had been hired to help navigate the situation. The attorney, a stern man named Robert Feldman, explained that the HOA's insurance policy included coverage for board member malfeasance, which would help recover some of the stolen funds. However, Feldman continued, insurance typically doesn't cover the full amount and there will be deductibles and exclusions. We're also pursuing civil litigation against Ms. Cunningham and Mr. Chen to recover assets, but that process can take years. In the short term, we need to elect a new board and develop a plan for managing finances with increased oversight. I was nominated for the board, and despite my better judgment, I accepted. Tom Rodriguez was elected president, and Carol Williams became treasurer. Our first order of business was implementing financial controls that should have existed all along. Dual signatures on all checks over $500, monthly financial reviews by a neutral third party, and quarterly audits by a licensed CPA firm. The criminal case moved through the courts slowly. Patricia and Marcus both pled not guilty initially, but as the evidence mounted, their attorneys started negotiating plea deals. The prosecutor's office was pushing for prison time given the amount stolen and the breach of fiduciary duty involved. Ronald Yamamoto avoided criminal charges after cooperating with investigators. It turned out he'd been pressured by Patricia and was terrified of confronting her. He'd signed documents without reviewing them carefully, which was negligent but not criminal. He was, however, named in the civil lawsuit along with the other former board members. 6 months after the initial arrests, Patricia Cunningham accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to felony theft and fraud charges in exchange for a sentence of 5 years in Arizona State Prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $380,000, though everyone knew that was unlikely to happen. Marcus Chen took his case to trial, arguing that he'd provided legitimate consulting services to the HOA and had no knowledge that Patricia was embezzling funds. It didn't work. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict him on multiple counts of fraud and money laundering. He received 7 years in prison. The civil case resulted in the seizure of the cityscape condo, Marcus's Tesla, and various other assets. The condo was sold at auction and the proceeds, about $620,000 after fees, went into a settlement fund. Combined with the insurance payout of $150,000 and the liquidation of Patricia's personal assets, the HOA recovered approximately $890,000. That was more than double what had been stolen, primarily because the condo had appreciated significantly in value since its purchase. The excess funds were used to establish a properly managed reserve fund with strict oversight provisions. The whole ordeal took nearly 18 months to fully resolve. During that time, I learned more about HOA law than I ever wanted to know. I also learned that financial fraud is far more common in HOA communities than most people realize. According to studies I read while researching our case, embezzlement by HOA board members affects thousands of communities across the country every year, usually going undetected because most homeowners don't scrutinize the financial statements. Jennifer kept telling me I should write a book about the experience. Instead, I started giving presentations at other HOA communities about financial oversight and red flags to watch for. I became something of an accidental expert on HOA governance, which wasn't exactly how I'd planned to spend my free time, but it felt important. The violation notices Patricia had issued to my property were all dismissed once the new board took over. We also discovered that she'd been using violations as a weapon against anyone who questioned her authority. I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted with frivolous citations. Tom Rodriguez turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He had a gift for bringing people together and diffusing conflicts before they escalated. Under his leadership, the community actually started to feel like a community instead of just a collection of houses with a shared set of rules. One unexpected outcome was that property values in Copper Ridge increased. Apparently, having a well-managed HOA with transparent finances and no embezzling board members is attractive to potential buyers. Who knew? I ran into Richard Cunningham, Patricia's ex-husband, at a grocery store about a year after the arrests. He looked older and tired, and I almost didn't recognize him. He saw me at the same moment I saw him, and for a second I thought he might turn and walk away. Instead, he approached me. "Derek, right?" "Yes. Hi, Richard." "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice quiet. "For exposing what Patricia was doing. I had no idea and I felt like an idiot when it all came out, but you probably saved me from being dragged down with her." "I'm sorry you had to go through that," I said, and I meant it. He'd lost his wife, his reputation, and probably a significant portion of his assets in the divorce that followed. Don't be. I'm better off knowing the truth, even if it hurts. She was lying to me for years, and I was too trusting to see it. He paused, then added, "I heard you're on the board now. I'm glad. The community needs people who actually care." He walked away before I could respond, pushing his shopping cart down the produce aisle with slumped shoulders. I stood there for a moment, thinking about how financial fraud doesn't just affect balance sheets. It destroys families and relationships and trust. The experience changed how I viewed community involvement. Before all this, I'd been the kind of homeowner who paid my dues and ignored the HOA drama. Now I understood that apathy and inattention create the perfect environment for corruption. Someone has to pay attention, someone has to ask questions, and someone has to be willing to challenge authority when things don't add up. Jennifer joked that I'd become a HOA vigilante, which wasn't entirely inaccurate. I did start reviewing the financial statements of other local HOAs when friends asked for advice. I found irregularities in about 1 out of every 4 communities I looked at. Nothing as dramatic as Patricia's scheme, but plenty of questionable expenses and poor financial controls. The local news did a follow-up story on our case about 18 months after the initial arrests. They interviewed me, Tom Rodriguez, and several other homeowners about the impact of the fraud and the recovery process. The reporter asked me if I'd do it all again, knowing what I know now about the time and stress involved. "Absolutely," I told her without hesitation. Someone had to stand up and say this wasn't right. If I hadn't pushed for the audit, Patricia would still be stealing from us right now, and the amount would be even higher. What advice would you give to other homeowners who suspect financial problems in their HOA? Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Get copies of the financial records. You have a legal right to them in Arizona and most other states. If you don't have the skills to analyze them yourself, find someone who does. And don't be intimidated by the board. They work for you, not the other way around. The story aired during the evening news and was shared widely on social media. I got thank you messages from people in other states who'd been dealing with similar issues in their own HOAs. A few even sent me their financial statements asking if I'd review them, which I had to politely decline since I had my own job to do. One message stuck with me. It was from a woman in Tucson whose HOA president had been stealing for over 5 years. She'd suspected something was wrong but didn't know how to prove it. After seeing my story, she'd filed for the financial records and found the same patterns I'd discovered: phantom vendors, inflated invoices, and mysterious expense categories. "You gave me the courage to speak up," she wrote. "I'm meeting with a detective next week. Thank you for showing that one person can make a difference." That message made all the sleepless nights and stress worthwhile. The final piece of the story came together almost 2 years after I first found that mysterious Unit 2847 in the spreadsheet. The insurance company and civil litigation had recovered enough money that the HOA was able to issue refund checks to every homeowner in the community. The amounts varied based on how long each person had lived there and how much they'd paid in elevated dues, but the average refund was about $3,800. I got a check for $4,200, which Jennifer and I used to take a long overdue vacation to San Diego. We spent a week at the beach, eating good food and not thinking about HOA finances or embezzlement schemes or court cases. It was exactly what we needed. On our last night in San Diego, we sat on the hotel balcony watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. Jennifer raised her margarita glass in a toast to fighting the good fight, even when it's exhausting and thankless. I clinked my beer bottle against her glass, and to supportive wives who don't divorce their husbands when they start 3 in the morning spreadsheet investigations. "I'll always support you when you're fighting for what's right," she said. "Just maybe try to do it during normal business hours next time. Deal?" When we returned to Scottsdale, life had settled into a new normal. The HOA was functioning smoothly under Tom's leadership, the financial controls were working, and people had started to trust the board again. I'd served my 2-year term and stepped down, happy to return to being a regular homeowner who just paid his dues and occasionally showed up to meetings. But I still read every financial statement that came out. I couldn't help myself. Once you've seen behind the curtain and understand how easy it is for someone to steal from a trusting community, you can't go back to blind faith. Patricia Cunningham was scheduled for release from prison in 3 more years. I didn't think about her often, but occasionally I'd wonder if she understood the full impact of what she'd done. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd betrayed the trust of 230 families who'd elected her to represent their interests. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than financial loss. Marcus Chen still had 5 years left on his sentence. His social media accounts had been deleted, and the flashy lifestyle he'd flaunted online had evaporated. I couldn't muster much sympathy for him. He'd known exactly what he was doing when he set up Residential Services LLC and started cashing those checks. The property management companies working with HOAs across the Phoenix metro area started advertising enhanced oversight and transparency in their services, clearly trying to capitalize on the publicity from our case. Several implemented new policies requiring independent audits and dual approvals for large expenses. That was a positive outcome, at least. Maybe our situation would prevent similar fraud elsewhere. I continued my forensic accounting work, but clients started asking me specifically about HOA cases. I ended up developing something of a specialty in community association fraud, testifying as an expert witness in several cases across Arizona, and even consulting on a few cases in California and Nevada. Each case I worked on revealed the same patterns. Trusted board members with access to funds and insufficient oversight, combined with homeowners who didn't pay attention to financial statements. The amounts varied. Some cases involved only $20,000 or $30,000, while others exceeded $1 million. But the fundamental breakdown was always the same. Jennifer eventually went back to school to get her master's degree in nursing leadership. When I asked what inspired the decision, she said watching me fight Patricia had reminded her that you can't just accept the status quo when you see problems. You have to be willing to challenge broken systems and push for change. You're going to be a dangerous combination as an educated nurse with a reformer's mindset, I told her. I learned from the best, she said with a smile. 3 years after the initial discovery, I was invited to speak at a national conference for community association managers in Las Vegas. The conference focused on fraud prevention and fiduciary responsibility, and my case had become something of a cautionary tale in the industry. Standing at the podium looking out at 500 property managers and HOA board members, I felt the weight of what had happened. These people managed billions of dollars in collective homeowner assets. If even a small percentage of them were corrupt or negligent, the financial damage would be staggering. The most important thing I learned from this experience, I told the audience, is that fraud prevention starts with transparency and engagement. Patricia Cunningham was able to steal for 2 years because nobody was paying attention. The financial statements were sent out, but people didn't read them. Questions were asked, but they were dismissed or deflected. Red flags were visible, but everyone assumed someone else was monitoring the situation. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a simple chart of the monthly payments to Residential Services LLC. This is what embezzlement looks like. Regular payments to a vendor nobody had heard of for services that weren't being performed. It should have been caught immediately, but it wasn't because our culture accepted that the board president had absolute authority over finances. The audience was completely silent, and I could see people taking notes frantically. Your job as board members and property managers is to create systems that make fraud difficult and detection easy. Require multiple approvals, conduct regular audits, publish detailed financial statements, and most importantly, create a culture where questions are welcomed, not punished. When a homeowner asks why expenses are increasing, don't get defensive. Show them the data and help them understand. When someone requests financial records, provide them immediately, not after a legal fight. After the presentation, I was surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories or ask specific questions about fraud detection. One elderly woman told me she'd been trying to get answers from her HOA board for 3 years and kept getting stonewalled. A property manager confessed that he'd noticed irregularities in one of his managed communities, but was afraid to speak up because the board president was an attorney who'd threatened to sue him for defamation. These conversations went on for over an hour, and each one reinforced my belief that our case wasn't an isolated incident. It was just one of thousands happening across the country, most of which would never be detected or prosecuted. As I flew home from Las Vegas, I thought about how much had changed in 3 years. I'd gone from being a regular homeowner minding his own business to becoming an advocate for HOA reform and financial transparency. It wasn't a path I'd chosen deliberately, but it felt right. The plane landed in Phoenix just after sunset, and Jennifer was waiting at the curb to pick me up. "How was Vegas?" she asked as I tossed my bag in the back seat. "Depressing and inspiring in equal measure," I said. "There's so much work to be done." That sounds very much like the Derek I married, never satisfied with good enough, always pushing for better. "Is that a compliment or a complaint?" "Both," she said with a laugh. "Definitely both." We drove home through the desert darkness, past the familiar landmarks of our neighborhood. The Copper Ridge entrance sign was illuminated by landscape lighting, and I could see the artificial pond reflecting the stars. It looked peaceful and well-maintained, which was what an HOA was supposed to provide. Our house was dark when we pulled into the driveway. I grabbed my bag and followed Jennifer inside, where our cat immediately started complaining about the empty food bowl. Normal, domestic, boring life, and I'd never been more grateful for it. But I also knew that somewhere in some community, probably multiple communities, another Patricia Cunningham was writing checks to a phantom vendor or inflating invoices, or finding creative ways to steal from trusting homeowners. And somewhere, I hoped, another Derek Mitchell was reviewing financial statements at 3 in the morning and starting to notice that something didn't add up. That's how change happens. One person paying attention, asking questions, and refusing to accept easy answers. One person deciding that fighting for what's right matters more than avoiding conflict. One person standing up in an HOA meeting and saying, "This doesn't make sense, and I want answers." Looking back on everything that happened, I don't regret confronting Patricia or pushing for the audit or spending countless hours documenting evidence. The process was exhausting and stressful, but it was also necessary. Someone had to do it, and I'm glad it was me. The final irony is that Patricia's embezzlement scheme ultimately made our community stronger. The new financial controls and oversight mechanisms we implemented became a model for other HOAs. Property values increased because buyers knew we had our act together. And residents became more engaged in community governance because they'd seen firsthand what happens when people don't pay attention. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a community is for the dysfunction to be exposed and addressed rather than hidden and ignored. The short-term pain of confronting corruption is worth the long-term benefit of building systems that prevent it from happening again. I still live in Copper Ridge, in the same townhouse I bought 7 years ago. My HOA dues are lower now than they were during Patricia's presidency, and the community looks better than ever. The artificial ponds are clean, the landscaping is maintained properly, and the financial statements are transparent and detailed. Tom Rodriguez is still president, now in his 3rd term because nobody else wants the job and he's actually good at it. Carol Williams remains treasurer, guarding the finances like a protective mother bear. And I'm just a regular homeowner again, though I still review every financial statement and occasionally ask pointed questions at meetings. Jennifer finished her master's degree and got promoted to a leadership position at the hospital. She tells people that living through the HOA scandal taught her valuable lessons about institutional corruption and reform that she applies in her work. I'm not sure if she's serious or joking, but either way, I'm proud of her. The woman from Tucson, whose HOA president was embezzling funds, successfully got her case investigated and prosecuted. Her president got 6 years in prison, and the community recovered most of the stolen money. She sent me a thank you card with a photo of her HOA's new board, all of them smiling and holding their financial oversight policy manual. These small victories matter. They prove that individuals can make a difference, that corruption doesn't always win, and that communities can recover from betrayal and emerge stronger. My career took an unexpected turn after the publicity from the case. I'm now frequently hired specifically for HOA fraud investigations, and I've helped uncover embezzlement schemes in over 30 communities across 5 states. The work is rewarding in a way my normal forensic accounting cases aren't, because I'm helping regular people, families and retirees and first-time homeowners who are being victimized by people they trusted. Each case follows a similar pattern: suspicious financial statements, a defensive board president, phantom vendors or inflated expenses, and ultimately a trail of money leading to unauthorized personal expenses. The details vary, but the fundamental betrayal is always the same. I've testified in court more times than I can count, always explaining the same basic principles of financial controls and fiduciary duty. Judges and juries are generally sympathetic to homeowners who have been defrauded, which means conviction rates in these cases are high when they actually make it to trial. But prevention is better than prosecution. That's why I spend time educating HOA boards and homeowners about warning signs and best practices. If I can prevent even one community from going through what we experienced, the effort is worthwhile. Jennifer sometimes teases me that I've become obsessed with HOA corruption, and she's probably right. But it's an obsession born from experience and a genuine desire to protect people from predators who exploit their trust. Late at night, when I'm reviewing financial statements for a new case and finding the same red flags I found in Patricia's records, I think about that moment at 3 in the morning when I first saw Unit 2847 in the spreadsheet. That moment changed everything, not just for me, but for hundreds of homeowners in my community and potentially thousands more who have benefited from the reforms and awareness that followed. One person paying attention. One person asking questions. One person refusing to accept that something suspicious was just a clerical error or a misunderstanding. That's all it takes to expose corruption and start the process of reform. It's not easy and it's not always welcomed, but it's necessary. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because some things are worth fighting for: honesty, accountability, and the right of homeowners to know that their money is being managed ethically and transparently. The story of Patricia Cunningham's downfall became a local legend in Scottsdale, the kind of cautionary tale people reference when discussing HOA governance. New board members are told about it during orientation. Property managers use it as an example in training sessions. And homeowners occasionally recognize my name and thank me for what I did. I don't consider myself a hero. I'm just someone who's reasonably good with numbers and stubborn enough to pursue answers when things don't add up. The real heroes are the neighbors who supported the investigation despite social pressure to drop it, the detective who took our concerns seriously, and the prosecutor who built a solid case that held corrupt officials accountable. But if my role in exposing the fraud inspired even one other person to pay attention to their HOA finances and ask hard questions, then everything we went through was worth it. That's how we protect our communities and hold leaders accountable, one vigilant homeowner at a time. The audit was indeed brutal, but it was also necessary. And in the end, justice prevailed, the community recovered, and important lessons were learned about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of financial oversight. Some stories end with villains riding off into the sunset unpunished. This one ends with criminals in prison, stolen money recovered, and a community that emerged stronger and more engaged than before. That's the ending I'll take any day.